Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Lost Decades podcast. I'm Austin,
I'm Andrew.
and on this episode, we will be taking you through the years from 1960 BC to 1940 BC. So I hope you're used to the fact that we're essentially getting smaller numbers. Is an odd way to move into the future. You're getting
Yeah.
you're going into the past.
Well,
So I wanted to start off this episode by just kind of laying out the plan, which is essentially that I would say for this episode in particular, it's not really so much about this is exactly what was going on between 1960 and 1940. First of all, because the more I research, the more I realize a lot of these things, there isn't necessarily a specific year that something happened. They don't, or there's disagreement on the year. And also, just the fact that there's a lot more I've been learning about this time period, and I just want to talk about it. So I wanted to say that up front, but we're going to explore some of the other what are we calling this? Not nations. It's like
kingdoms might be the best way. I don't
kingdoms, I
know.
guess. Yeah, city
Entity.
states. I finally understand what my social studies teacher was talking about when they kept talking about the city states. I really understand why that was what was going on at this time. Because that is one thing that I sort of knew, but I'm really wrapping my head around the fact that a lot of these people that we talk about when we talk about these groups, like later we're going to talk about the Amorites and the Elamites and there were so many ites,
Sumerians.
Sumerians and
Acadians.
Acadians. Almost, I know I said this before, but it really is like they are all named after a city. It would be like, but it's so funny to think about because it'd be like the New Yorkers spread around Mesopotamia and the San Diegans were spread their empire. Like they really are cities, but they're acting like they're an entire like ethnic group, but they kind of are because they a lot of times have their own language, but it's just for that small area.
Yeah.
Very interesting, very different from now. So just in my little intro, I learned a couple things that happened in this general time period of, let's just say 2000 BC-ish. In the year 2000 BC, glass appears.
Interesting.
Um,
For
so
what purpose? I'm assuming more like
that is literally all I wrote down is glass appears.
because I didn't know if they meant more like because I'm assuming it's not like windows and stuff. It's probably more like maybe glass jewelry and stuff or like glass
Yeah, like beads.
pottery, if that's the right way to phrase
Because
it.
how would they? I really should have looked into this, but how would you have made glass this long ago? Like, could you make fire that hot that you could make glass?
Apparently, you can with enough from watching other shows. You make a kiln and you pump enough air. It needs a lot of air, like to really heat
Hmm.
it up, but you can get there. And they've got the manpower back then, plus they got slaves and stuff are obviously very common.
Right.
You can just have someone who just does that all day.
They've got time. They don't have podcasts to listen to.
Yeah.
So then around that same time, this is sort of random, but the Sumerian cuneiform evolves into the old Assyrian cuneiform.
Interesting.
So it just kind of shows like a shift between who's kind of in charge. Sorry, this is actually I believe this is in the Assyria area. They're kind of developing their own script, splitting off from the Sumerian, which had been the first, I believe, to invent the writing, were the Sumerians.
Yeah.
And then jumping ahead a little bit, another fun fact is that in 1900 BC, cacao is domesticated in modern day Guatemala.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know they domesticated that really.
Yeah, because I don't really think of that as domesticated, but maybe it looked different originally. Maybe it was
And I'm
less.
curious how it was really used, because obviously they weren't making chocolate, but maybe they were just still grinding up the seeds and
Yeah, I mean, I know much later, like the Mayans and Aztecs and stuff, it was always as like a hot chocolate type thing with like spicy hot chocolate.
that makes sense.
So I don't know if they were doing that too, but yeah. Another interesting thing, and then I'm going to jump into kind of a catch up, but I just thought this was cool to think about. I noticed a lot of these groups we're going to discuss, these cities and city states, were spoke Semitic languages. And really, for me, like Semitic, I only really knew, I think of like Jewish people or Semitic, like that's all I really knew. But apparently, the Semitic languages include Arabic, Amharic, Tigrinya, Aramaic, Hebrew, Maltese, and modern South Arabian languages, and
Interesting.
numerous other ancient and modern languages.
I mean, it shows how continuously lived in this area was, which I guess seems obvious, but when we
Hmm.
think of a lot of other histories, like there's not a lot going on until later. This region has been like continually developed forever. Like, because I'm pretty sure Baghdad, current Baghdad, is built on the ruins of the city of Ur.
I don't remember if it's Ur exactly, but it is built on some Babylonian city for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
that's
really
what I was going
cool.
to say that's
Yeah.
interesting about this time period that I was looking into because I was a little confused looking at a lot of the maps because I was like, how come it says Ur is a coastal city, but when you look at it on a modern map, it's very far away. So the Persian Gulf was a lot bigger back then.
Hmm. I did see that. That is really cool.
And so I was looking into like why. And so I guess, first of all, it used to be, and granted, there's a while ago, like 18,000 years ago, the peninsula was, or not the peninsula, the sea was
Hmm.
very, or was completely dry.
Really?
Yeah,
So that was connected. There was no sea there.
there was no
There's no
sea.
Arabian Peninsula, peninsula basically.
And, sorry, I'm blanking on what the name of the sea is right there, real quick. I don't
The
know why.
Red Sea. The Red Sea.
That's the Red Sea right there.
Yeah.
No, no, no. I'm talking about the other one, the one near Mesopotamia.
The one that like was bigger before.
That was bigger before. Yeah, is
Oh, the Persian Gulf. Persian
the
Gulf. Sorry.
Persian Gulf. Yeah, I am sorry. I
Sorry.
don't
Yeah,
know
I
why I
should.
was playing. I've read so much about it. I even have it like in my notes, but I
We
don't
have
know
a
why.
lot in our heads right now.
Yeah, so the Persian Gulf was completely. You
It
can
is
even
funny
see
we're
it on
talking
that
about the
map right
Persian
there.
Gulf right
See
now.
that top like Y-shaped kind of thing right there? That's not there in modern day. It actually kind of just ends sort of. You see where that river kind of empties out from Elam? Elam?
Yeah.
That's kind of the modern end of the Gulf. And so
Okay.
for like 8,000 years ago, that was just a dry basin. And then as the glaciers receded and sea levels rose, it really flooded that area and essentially flooded all the way up to how you see it on this map. And
Hmm.
then, but this region was also a lot more, I don't know if savanna is the right topography to say, but not as arid as it is today. And so and those rivers flowed a lot more than they do now, like a lot more. So partially it was sediment buildup pushing the coastline
Yeah.
out from the
Like
Tigris and Euphrates
silting.
rivers,
Yeah.
filling that in. But also as the region got a lot more arid, it dried up and there was less water. And so it was twofold of the rivers weren't flowing nearly as much, so less water was making it into the Persian Gulf because that's what's filling it up. And
Hmm.
then a lot of the water was evaporating and drying up. So it got a lot smaller as time went on. And then as humans started to dam and irrigate and do things like that, it made it smaller. And apparently it's continuing to shrink to this
Hmm.
day. It's not like it's going
Hmm.
to disappear or anything like that. But
Yeah.
the coastline is continuing to recede even to this day, which is interesting.
Right. And I guess if it technically disappeared, it would just mean that it would, yeah, Saudi Arabia, like the Arabian Peninsula would stop being, it would just connect back with like Iran and
Yeah.
the sea would, the ocean would just be next to
So
it.
it's just an interesting thing to think about because I guess it's like we're so used to environmental changes obviously taking place over like millions or hundreds of thousands of years. It's just
Hmm.
crazy to think that humans were around enough to see these changes, kind of like you
To
mentioned
see
last time,
geological change.
like
Yeah.
the desertification of the Sahara and stuff like that. Like that these things were happening that like not just because
Right.
of the culture and the buildings, but if you went back and just looked at the topography and the environment of Mesopotamia at this time, it would look so different than it does today.
Yeah, it's sort of like how apparently Sri Lanka used to be connected to India, and then there was a big tsunami,
And that happened
and
even much more recently.
much more recently, yeah.
Like
But
like
that's
the
just such a
the late
crazy
Middle
concept.
Ages or something is when that changed.
Yeah. No, it's awesome to think about. You wouldn't want to be there at the moment. Well, I guess for this it's just silting, but for the tsunami, you wouldn't want to be there. All right. So, also, I just wanted to say it was really funny for this week specifically for us to not be able to think of the Persian Gulf
I don't know why, because I've mentioned it so many times other times.
for
Like,
multiple different reasons.
I
Yeah.
think it's just all this overload of information. I've
Yeah,
done
no.
a lot of research on a lot of these areas.
I mean, for me, it's 10 p.m. and for you, it's 7 p.m. But
I don't have as much of
it's
an
a
ex-
work day, people.
But
Tell us
yeah,
the
and
slang.
I just got off work like an hour ago.
Yeah,
So
I feel like I just got off work. So, all right, we are going to jump into specifically what was going on at this time, but I just felt like I wanted to give a quick catch up for just this is what's going on in the Bronze Age. So we're in the Bronze Age right now, and I just wanted to run through what's been going on, and then we'll jump into what's happening at this exact moment. But essentially, bronze is invented, and then at first they apparently used arsenic, um, and so they could use bronze, but it would kill anyone that used it, which I thought was funny. Like, imagine I feel like they'd be like, wow, you can make this wonderful weapon, but it literally kills you. It's like a cursed weapon. So then they realize you can use tin, and that actually kind of jump starts all this trading because they need the tin. And apparently there was the closest place that really had tin was the Iranian plateau, which is where the
Elamite.
Amorite or Elamites
Yes.
live. So they're going to come up. So basically, Sumer, invents the wheel. Writing is invented, and the Levant has things going on. They're kind of in between Egypt and Mesopotamia. They're the middle part of the Fertile Crescent. Apparently, Egypt at this time had a lot of gold, which is mainly from Upper Egypt, and quite a bit of copper, but did not have tin. But also the trading makes writing much more important because you're doing this long distance trading, so you're trying to keep track of everything better. And then because of the owning the tin, problem starts growing. Apparently, according to someone, the first recorded war was in 2700 BC. Was Kish, which is a Sumerian city, versus Elam. Uh, and their Elam basically, or Susa specifically, is in the foothills of the Zagros Mountains, which is kind of essentially think of the Zagros Mountains as the eastern border of Mesopotamia, sort of is how I think of it. Um, and that was cool to me. That was the first war, and apparently Kish won, but Elam would eventually outlive Sumer, and then Sumer gets attacked by the Akkadians in 2334 BC and the by Sargon of Akkad. So again, they're called the Akkadians because they started in Akkad,
And
and
Acadians are considered the first real empire.
that is the first empire. Yeah, and they rule for about 150 years until 2154, and they get basically conquered by the Gutians, which come from the Zagros Mountains, which is going to be a continuing theme. And Gutians are very poorly known. They're very mysterious. There's almost no information about them, and they're essentially the first case of these barbarian so-called coming from these mountains and then basically becoming the locals. They have their dynasty until about 2120, and then the I believe the Neo-Sumerians, that's the Ur-3 starts. I forget the specifics. They essentially conquer from the kick the Gutians out, and they actually subdue Elam. They kind of these Neo-Sumerians conquer Elam and in the east, but then in the west, the Amorites, who I'm also going to talk about later, become sort of their main barbarian enemies on the western side, and eventually they build a wall between the Tigris and the Euphrates specifically to keep out the Amorites. Um,
Because
and
again, the Amorites first came in into like the Levant, then they moved up into northern. I don't know if you count that as Mesopotamia yet, but like near Mari, the city of Mari, and stuff
mhm,
like that. And before they
yep.
made their way down into Akkad and to Ur.
Right, I have a map here somewhere. Give me a second. Um, yeah, essentially where it says like Yamhad and Quatna there is. All right, were you talking about Elam or
No, 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 the
Amorites, right?
Amorites, yeah. I mean,
Anyway, yeah,
Amorites
they're.
literally means in like the ancient Sumerian is just peoples from the west.
Hmm. And the Amorites are the ones who eventually they go around the wall, and in 2004 they conquer the the Empire, whatever you want to call it.
Well, yeah, they kind of they sort of fill in into where the power vacuum is, but what really ended it was the Elamites coming
The
in
Elamites. Okay,
and
the
take.
Amorites kind of weaken them, and then the Elamites actually, because I
Mhm.
think the Amorites just sort of sack it and leave, and then the
Well,
Elamites
they
actually
leave, but
take
they
over,
form their
right?
own cities or govern other ones because that's what's interesting is us talking about the Is and Larsa period. Isin and Larsa are both Amorite dynasties,
Right.
so it's
Interesting.
interesting.
Okay, so the Amorites, yeah, they do basically spread around at that time. Okay, so then and to remind people, we're now in the Isin Larsa period where has now fallen, and well,
Isin's the first like successor. They claim, their lineage pretty much doesn't stop, at least how they wrote the King's List, is that they pretty much pick up. I mean, they style themselves the same way. They still speak Sumerian, which is funny because, again, most of the people speak Akkadian. It's kind of like, you do in England. It's the same thing where it's like the nobility are all speaking French, but the people are speaking English.
right.
So it's kind of their tie to legitimacy. They're even using the Sumerian script and stuff still instead of the Akkadian one that is much more prevalent, pretty much just to legitimize themselves.
Okay, cool. So yeah, the Ibi Sin was the last king of Ur-3, and he gets taken captive to Elam, and that's really the end of it, right?
Hmm.
They also is that also when they steal the Nana statue,
Yes,
the goddess
it
of the
is.
moon? Okay.
The one that Isin later, we talked about that last episode. Um, Isin Era's successor, who I'm blanking on right now, but he comes in and basically gets it back. We don't know how. We don't know if it was through conquest or through trade, but he gets it back and it brings it to Ur and kind of because Ur's sort of been this cultural center as much as we talked about um, Nipper being the spiritual center. Ur itself has kind of been like social center. I mean, it's where a lot of this stuff started. It's where the most recent empire kind of claim because at its peak, I mean, the on the map you're looking at, the Ur-3 dynasty controlled pretty much from Ur down at the bottom all the way up past Mari
Hmm.
into Ebla. I think about there
Right.
kind of the extent.
Yeah, and Ebla, I know they were around for a really long time. I have a little bit about them later, but they thought of the Amorites as like these weird barbarians nearby. So this is, yeah, on this map, it's a little bit before the Amorites really are respected, I guess, or have really any power. But
So the map you're looking at now is pretty much our. I know it says 2000 BC, but it's kind of how the map is for us.
so apparently El, they think there's this god El in this region that eventually essentially turns into like the Jewish god, they think. And there's also a theory that there is this other god Yahweh who is in the pantheon, and it sort of merged with El, and
Hmm.
Yahweh was like a storm god, a storm warrior, and so that kind of combined with like El was kind of like more, I think, the king of the gods. And there's also a theory that the early version of Yahweh was originally depicted fully anthropomorphic, sexualized, and sometimes bull-horned body, including feet, limbs, torso, face, and genitals, before later Greek Platonic influence recast the deity as immaterial and disembodied. And there's a line that says Yahweh and his Asherah, indicating a former divine consort akin to El's spouse, an element later removed during proto monotheistic reforms. So,
I mean, it makes
It's
sense though too.
crazy to think
Back
about.
then, remember the gods were seen as the statues are kind of what the gods embody, like they're actually there. Now, granted, again, they think the gods are in heaven as well doing that stuff, but when they come to Earth, when they're, you know, communing with people, that they're very much in those statues. So they're very important. That it's like, even if the god is all around us and can't be seen, the statue is kind of the embodiment of the god.
And not just the statue, but we were saying like the cities themselves
Hmm.
were very focused on having a god of that city. And
Because again, that's what was interesting is that when they founded these cities. I originally didn't understand, and I thought I was under the assumption that a lot of times they just founded the city and kind of maybe not made up a god, but sort of just were like, oh, this is the god of this city. But
right,
typically,
it somehow naturally, like organically came out of the city or something.
yeah, but instead it was more like they pulled from the pantheon that already existed. So they would found a city and be like, oh, Nana is the ruler of this city. Well, not the ruler, but the protector.
The
This is
god, yeah.
the god of this city. And that's what made Nippur so important because Nippur's patron deity was um, the head of all the gods.
Oh, so
Hmm.
that's why it was such a big place. Yeah, that's one thing to
Yeah.
keep in mind is places like Nippur, Babylon later, they remained so popular where a lot of people still know their name now, especially Babylon. But it's one reason like they these people understood that there was history. Like this is kind of the history is being made right now, even though, as I said, there was even history before this time we're currently talking about. So the cities, like the ones I just mentioned, that have different rulers and have all these different, they get fully sacked and rebuilt, but there's still this like presence that even people from completely different areas will like hear legends about it, and they have respect for the cities. Like they know that if they can conquer it, they will have power because it's like, oh, it's almost like saying like, oh, I'm the mayor of New York and you're just the, I have this special like um privilege that
I
other
mean, it
like
makes sense
I
because
never
I
really
was looking it up. The name I can't believe I forgot, but Enlil is the head of all the gods. He's like the Zeus, if you
okay.
will, and Enlil is the patron deity of Nippur. And they even have kind of like their own Mount Olympus. They have a giant um, temple built on top of one of the highest like hills or cliffs in the city, and that is where all the gods are essentially supposed to reside when they commune. Technically, it's Enlil's territory, but since he's in charge, that's where the you can be closest to the gods is in that temple. And so a lot of the even Babylonian and Assyrian kings of the future and even current
Mhm.
ones come down to essentially pay tribute and get acceptance from Enlil for their rule. And that's why Nippur is kind of the Switzerland
Mm,
of this time period. Very much stay neutral and typically don't get sacked that often because even Amorites and other people like that kind of just respect that that's what it is. It is where the gods
mm.
sit.
They don't want to anger the gods.
Yeah.
Interesting. Uh, yeah, one while we're this will be the last thing I have to say about like the gods in general, but the L can still be found in names. So like Elizabeth, Ishmael, Israel, Samuel, Daniel, Michael, Gabriel, Manuel, Bethel. I don't know, I've never heard of Bethel, but that's kind of insane that it's kind of hidden in all these names is like this really, really ancient Mesopotamian god.
Yeah. It's
Um,
it's crazy just how I mean, I guess it's like modern day religions, but it's funny that you have all these different city states and stuff like that, but they all are like, oh yeah, they all worship the same gods. Now, I'm not saying the like exact same gods, but the same pantheon. And even if they have differences, they kind of try to include the current pantheon. We're not looking at, Mari, Babylon, Elam, and Assyria all as having completely different gods. They all
right.
more or less have the same god. They have different patron deities, but they're following the same pantheon.
I feel like you can think of it as like, yeah, like it almost feels like the gods are similar because of the cities. So it's like, okay, there's Nippur and it has this god. What's the god in Nippur?
Um, Enlil.
Enlil. It's like, okay, so even if the Akkadians conquer Nippur, they just still keep the god. You know, they might change the name or something, but yeah, they kind of move when you move to the area, you almost just naturally acquire like the gods of the area, it seems like. And I'm sure they also bring their gods from wherever they come from and kind of
Hmm.
mix them a little bit. But yeah, I love thinking about this stuff honestly. So
Yeah,
anyway,
you
I
don't
will
really
move
get to
on.
a different pantheon until you get over to Egypt, where it actually is a completely different pantheon with a completely different religious belief and stuff. But all through, the central to eastern Fertile Crescent, it's more or less the same. I mean, very broadly, but
So going to Elam, which is where the Elamites are from. It is the eastern edge of the basically Mesopotamia is where the Elamites are, kind of near the coast, and it's in modern day Iran. And there's this region or province of Iran called Khuzestan that is essentially that is what Elam is, which I thought I had a picture of it. Maybe I don't. But anyway, there's Elam. So that region, so there's still a lot of ruins and things you can see from Elam. And you can almost, the best way I could say it is that you can think of the Elamites and Elam as Proto-Persia.
yeah.
They're at least one major like element of what becomes the Persian like culture and empire
Yeah,
later
they
on.
definitely start originating from there. I know that's much later, but
But it's interesting to think that they're stewing. They're there, they're doing stuff, and they're eventually gonna
well, yeah, speaking of
really.
stewing, there are so many. It's funny reading these and you start recognizing these names of the cities and you're like, "Oh, wow. There's a lot of big empires way in the future that come out of this region."
Right. I know it is just to remind people like we're not even on the Babylons yet, the Babylonia. The Tower of Babel has not been built, you know.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
we're way in the
Babylon
past, which is fun.
splitting into, and then, yeah, Assyria, all that stuff, Persia, Achaemenids. It's crazy.
And another name for the Elamites was, or at least the area was Susiana, which I thought was kind of a cool name, but it's because of Susa was one of their major cities, as you can see, kind of their northern city. It's crazy to me how far Susa and Anshan are, that they could be the same people that far away. But
Hmm.
I'm sure they're fairly different. But um,
Well, as you can kind of
yeah,
tell on the map, their region isn't as fertile. They have a lot of the tin, they have a lot of mining and stuff, but it's less desired. So I think there's less. I mean, obviously they're going to be different, but there's less independence as when you look at Sumer or Acadia, where there's just all it's a cornucopia of different cultures.
right. Um, and apparently, Susa is only 27 miles west of Persepolis, which is basically Persia comes from like Persepolis. So it's like that's the city for the Persians. So yeah, it's just I never knew that.
Yeah.
So one other thing about the Elamites is they are actually non-Semitic. So I said the Semitic languages earlier. They're non-Semitic and non-Indo-European speaking. So they're very much kind of doing their own thing. It's a language isolate. And the other languages in the area were Sumerian, Kassite, and Hurrian. And I did actually learn a little bit about the Hurrians, but I'm going to save that for another time. Um, and yeah, they did trade both the Elamites and I believe the Babylonians, or not Babylonians, excuse me, I'm just going to say the Mesopotamians. They traded with the Indus Valley civilization at this time, especially Susa. They were big traders with the Indus Valley to the east, and they found various objects made with shells that are from the Indus coast and like beads and things like that. But what was really, and apparently they etched the beads with some sort of like acid etching that they were developed by the Harappans, which are the people that were in the Indus Valley. But then in 1900, it essentially goes away because that is when the Indus Valley sort of vanishes or ends, is in 1900. So that's coming up pretty soon. All right, so that is the Elamites. We are going to definitely come back to them in the future, but they're over there think of them kind of like the Persians, sort of. Then we've got the Amorites. The Amorites, um, one thing I thought was kind of just funny was just to start out. Well, first, I'll say some of their cities. So these are some of the cities that the Amorites will eventually control or currently control. Isin, Kurta, Larsa, Mari, and Ebla, and Babylon,
Hmm.
and the 14th dynasty of Egypt um, were all Amorites. So they actually do a lot. And but in the Sumerian myth called the Marriage of Martu, which is written around this time, a goddess considers marriage to the god of the Amorites, and this is what um, she is told. Now listen, their hands are destructive and their features are those of monkeys. An Amorite is one who eats what the moon god Nana forbids and does not show reverence. They never stop roaming about. They are an abomination to the gods' dwellings. Their ideas are confused. They only cause disturbance. The Amorite is clothed in sack leather, lives in a tent exposed to wind and rain, and cannot properly recite prayers. He lives in the mountains and ignores the places of gods, digs up truffles in the foothills, does not know how to bend the knee in prayer, and eats raw flesh. He has no house during his life, and when he dies, he will not be carried to a burial place. My girl, why would you marry Martu?
I
Like,
read that too, and I
have
thought it
it.
was so funny. Like it's
Yeah.
like barbarians before barbarians. It's so funny how things don't really change throughout history in terms of describing
Nope. There's
people.
always a civilization, usually in the lower lowlands, and then there's some people like up in the hills that sometimes come down and they're called barbarians. Did you have anything you wanted to say about the Amorites?
No, because I kind of covered it in some other episodes, so I didn't want to go too into it because they're very much as they're they have a culture and stuff. They it seems like one of their best properties is blending in and assimilating with the cultures
True,
around them. So
true.
when they go to Egypt, they become very Egyptian. When they come to Sumar, they get very Sumerian. When they're in
That's a good point.
Mari, they're very Mari. They become Phoenician and stuff. So they're very adaptable. And what I thought was interesting about this time too is reading that they said, especially when these Amorites were coming in and causing havoc, if you will, that it wasn't as devastating to the daily lives of people as you might expect. Obviously, we focus so much on the kings because of the things writing everything down, and obviously there it has a huge impact on them. But the Amorites weren't like, don't get me wrong. Some cities got sacked and things like that, but a lot of the Amorites were very enamored with how things were and wanted that lifestyle for themselves. So a lot of times they would come to the city, take over, but then just assimilate and try to live that way. They wouldn't try to force their ideals onto everyone else. They kind of were like, oh, there's a reason you guys are this successful, and we're gonna kind of just build upon what came before,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying.
Especially when these people are literally inventing so many things, like the Sumerians are inventing writing and so many aspects of government and the wheel, where it's like, why would you not copy that? You know, like, it's good stuff. You know?
Yeah.
So, before we move on to Egypt, I will just say a couple of things, just running through the history of kind of the Amorites, but specifically this one city called Mari, which is one of their cities. I just thought this was crazy. It first got abandoned in the middle of the 26th century BC. It's like the
Hmm.
2600s. So it'd already been living there for who knows how long. That's when it first gets abandoned. Um, and then it was rebuilt and becomes the capital of an East Semitic state around 2500 BC. Then they're in a war with their longtime rival Ebla. So Ebla was a big player at this time, and they're more Sumerian. And then it was destroyed in the 23rd century BC by the Akkadians, but they allowed it to be rebuilt and appointed a military governor who was apparently named Shaka Naku. I don't know why they needed to like specifically tell me that. And then the when the Akkadian Empire falls apart, the governors become independent and they rebuild it as a regional power of the Euphrates Valley. And actually, sorry, the military governor, I guess the title is called Shakanaku, because then it says the Shakanakus ruled Mari until the second half of the 19th century BC when the dynasty collapsed for unknown reasons. So actually, Mari is still around right now, but it's going to collapse soon, which is strangely kind of soon after this area would have sacked lower Mesopotamia.
Yeah, I mean, we're really in the, using Egypt terms, we're in like the Mesopotamian intermittent period, essentially, is what was going on right
Hmm. But that means it makes it sound like it's sort of this like waiting time, but it almost is there's the most happening in some ways, but it's just hard to keep track of because there's so much happening in all these different places. They're just
And a
not
lot of
really.
it's not being written down, or I can't say
Yeah,
that it wasn't written down. It's either just not been discovered or being destroyed by enemies. There's so many rivals and claimants and people taking power and cities getting destroyed and new cities getting rebuilt that, yeah, it's it's interesting.
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
like
one of the
hard to
guys,
narrow it
like
down.
talking about the history, Isin, because we're sort of approaching Isin's peak in the Isin Larsa period, and literally
Right.
who's ruling right now is just Ishme-Dagon. And if anyone ends up doing their own research on it, because I really try to dig into this, there is not much about him.
Hmm.
He not much is written down about the things that he did, other than essentially just rebuilding, or not rebuilding, but adding to the temple complex at Nippur. And even going through, because again, a lot of these guys have yearly king names. It almost
Right.
feels like a joke that they're really struggling to find, like, oh, um, what were his actual, like, what did he actually do? Because most of his king names are
Right. That's funny. I know. Imagine if like the president had to have a name every year. It's like, oh, I didn't do anything this year. Like, this is the year I had a McDonald's banquet.
Yeah, because I mean because I have him right here on this tab. It's literally just I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's funny. It's like became king, installed a priestess at the priestess of Nana, and then a year the next year is literally just called the year after he installed the princess at Nana, the priestess, and then the
He did
second
it
year
again.
after he installed the priestess at Nana, and then it's just like
That seems like a
the
bad
third
sign. The
year after
priestesses.
he passed it, and then it's just like he built a chalice and he placed it in the temple, and then it's literally like the year after he placed a chalice in the temple. And I'm like, wow, this guy really was not, at least
He
on
was taking
record,
his
we do
time.
not have a lot of the things that he was doing. And to
That's
be
funny.
fair, he's probably focusing on stabilization, because I don't want to spoil it too
Yeah.
much, but the successor to him ends up doing a lot of things. And it feels like this guy's kind of just laying the groundwork. You need rulers like that. You have rulers who
Yeah.
are making big changes and rulers who are kind of stabilizing, bringing everything together, holding everything, and setting the foundation for someone else to build on top of.
And that's also one thing I want to keep in mind is, you know, you're right. Like he didn't really do anything, and he probably was more just maybe wasn't doing much. But the priestess and the temple and these ceremonies and the gods, I think no one knows, even the experts, but we really don't know just how different things were, and also just how probably more important religion was to it made me think about the fact that it's like, okay, yeah, like, but maybe like him putting that chalice in the temple was like a huge deal to them, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
um because I think that's just one thing that no one will really know, because all we really have is like some official writing and um whatever evidence that we have of this stuff is not very much. And we definitely don't have like novels or like diaries from people from this time, so it's like we really don't know what their inner thoughts were like about just like life and like um how they just sort of like saw things. And we just have like their very like formal
No, and
like
religion did play a
present.
huge role, because I'm reading about early Mesopotamia. Before they really had kings, there was just these high priests who were in charge of the temples, and it sort of led into there being kings, and then priests were separate. But it's just an interesting
Hmm.
thing. Religion just played such a key role in their
Their life.
power base. So, and again, the gods, they were so much a part of their everyday lives, and I don't just mean in a religious way. In a, like we talked about before, they see them everywhere. They see them in the water, in the air, in the animals, in the trees. Those are all the gods. Their actions. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was a totally different way of viewing the world. Was there anything you wanted to say about just the general kind of Mesopotamia, Levant area, like the rulers specifically, before I move into Egypt?
Nope, because again, I that was the ruler
Yeah,
there, and he ruled for I think it was
yeah,
22 years. So he ruled for a big chunk of this time, and there really
right.
wasn't
And then
much
after
going
him, is it
on.
going to be his son or?
Yeah, it's gonna
Okay.
be his son. He follows.
And what's
It's
his name again?
his name is Lipit Ishtar. Is the
And
son
he, oh, what's the current ruler right now?
Ishme Dagan?
And he is the ruler of
Isin,
like Isin. Okay, because we're in
and
the Isin Larsa period.
Isin controls a big chunk of it. Yeah,
But then while Isin and Larsa and he's ruling, this is concurrent with the Elamites ruling for a
yeah.
little tiny period in Ur.
No, no. This is after Ur's been retaken.
Oh, nice. Okay, okay.
So yeah,
Cool.
currently Ishin controls Ur and controls a lot of that region. Elamites are still independent; they're not ruled by that. But
Right.
that's why this is called the Isin Larsa period, because the Isin dynasty is the largest in control, the most successor state to the Neo-Sumerian Empire.
Right. All right. Well, I wanted to start off, and also we have been recording for a while, so I will jump into Egypt, but that'll be our last stop on our
Yeah, we
journey
really
today.
wanted to do a deep dive on. It's
We
nice to
did.
really cover Mesopotamia because we've been doing a lot more research and
We've been doing like as much as we've been talking about. I've read, yeah, so much more than I've even said on this episode.
and then
So,
Egypt. To be fair, there's not too much going on.
yeah, exactly.
We're into Senusret the First. Again, he's taking over pretty much right at 1960. It's technically 1961 BC. He's taken over. His dad was just assassinated.
This is
He's
him
using that to
actually.
consolidate a lot of power. He's going and getting rid of the people he doesn't like, appointing people loyal to him. One of his biggest accomplishments is he essentially fully annexes um, lower Nubia, and
Okay.
and what's funny is again because we talked about last time the cataracts.
Yeah.
Um, the cataract, Egypt had typically been to the first cataract, and then between the first and second cataract is considered
Upper Egypt.
no
Oh.
upper um, Nubia at this time
Oh.
period because it essentially gets
Oh, okay.
consolidated and that starts to be
Right.
referred to as Upper Egypt. But at this time, yeah, he's building a lot of forts. He's taking over because again, he's following his father's footsteps of trying to stomp out the Nubians, saying themselves as Ra's children and like we are the true people of the gods. And one of the interesting facts saw was by annexing it, this is where a lot of the gold mines are. They suddenly had this massive influx of gold. That gold was actually more common than silver. So at this time period, silver was seen as like the purest of the different kinds of precious metals. So don't get me wrong, gold was still important. It's not like gold's
Right. I
flowing
heard that.
everywhere,
Yeah.
but silver is the one that. So they're making special scepters out of silver. They're making cups out of silver, things like that, because that's the more rare resource for them. They have a lot of gold, especially after taking Nubia.
Well, I actually wanted to read a little bit from this book. I've been reading a book I read a couple years ago, The History of Egypt, which is kind of when I was first really getting into history. At this point, this might have been like 8 years ago or something, but um, it's one of the first history books I actually read that was really good. But this page kind of talks about the Nile River. So just, because the Nile River was such it basically is what Egypt is, essentially, is the Nile River. I just wanted to read a little bit here about it. So it says, Egyptian Nile has three major sources. The longest is the White Nile. The sources of this river until the mid 19th century, one of the world's great geographical mysteries, lie deep within Africa, especially in the lake region where Lake Victoria in Uganda and Tanzania makes the largest contribution. As it flows for more than 6,400 kilometers to the Mediterranean, the White Nile passes through 10 modern nations amid changing geography. In southern Sudan, it becomes mired in the Sood, a vast swamp that slows it and causes heavy water loss through evaporation. although the Sud also mediates the river's flow, releasing it over a longer period of time. Because of the Sud and the fact that Lake Victoria's catchment area is fed by rainfall throughout the year, the Egyptian Nile's flow never fails entirely. So it's a very steady river.
Yeah. And that's what made the cataracts so important too, is they were essentially natural buffers. I was reading a lot about how, by sailing up and down the Nile was most of the transportation. So these cataracts provided either difficult places or impassable places for ships and stuff like that. So they were natural places for borders. And funny enough, when you look at the cataracts right now, I mean, one of the second cataract, not exactly, but I just thought it was really interesting that it's essentially the separation between, on the Nile at least, between modern Egypt and modern Sudan. That's essentially
Right.
now not
There
exactly
it
there,
is.
but you can
Yeah.
kind of see how culturally that sets some
That,
sort of divide
yeah.
that persists to this day.
Yeah, you can't really fight geography. Like it's gonna do what it's gonna do,
Yeah.
Um, well, so going into Egypt, just to refresh everyone's memory, we had the Amenemhat the first founded the 12th dynasty around 1991, which I like because that was the year I was born. Maybe it was 1990. We don't know. It could be. Um, and so by 1960, he was well established as pharaoh, and that's the year we're technically starting with this episode. And he had moved to a new capital city in Ijtawi, and then he got assassinated in 1962. It's also crazy that the ruler of a major nation in the 60s, in
Yeah, like
1960s, is
1 year off.
assassinated.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. And in 2001, the two towers were hit up
Yeah.
there. Um, back to a serious note. um, I really need to see the Eminem Hat movie about him getting assassinated. Like, how is there not more movies set in ancient Egypt? All we have is the Mummy.
Because he ruled for so long. That's what's kind of crazy. So, Amenemhat the first ruled for 29 years and his son Senusret ruled for 36. And that's 36 solely.
That's solid.
And he was put as co-monarch before that. So if you include the co-monarchy, he ruled for 41 years, which especially
Wow.
back then just seems very impressive.
I know that's what I was thinking about because I was just thinking about reigns that someone only rules for like 6 years. You're like, wow, that's so short. Only 6 years is basically nothing, but that's literally 1.5 terms of. That's like as long as like JFK was president, or even
Yeah.
longer. Like. So at the time, it's a major thing. Even if they only rule for like 2 years, if you're living through it, it's gonna have some sort of impact. But
hmm
yeah, so Senusret rules, it says here until like 1956 BC, and he did a lot of
I have
campaigns in Nubia, right?
Senusret ruling until 1926 BC.
Oh wow. Okay, yeah. That is one thing I saw was that there are like a lot of different years
There
for
are
all.
conflicting dates, so yeah, I apologize to the listeners if some of these dates are incorrect because I look at multiple sources and get different dates. So I'm trying to stick with the same sources so that at least we're
Mhm.
consistent in our
Same.
descriptions of what's happening.
I think we're
So,
both I think we're, funnily enough, I feel like we're both sticking to one timeline, but we're using different timelines. So
yeah,
we should talk about that off podcast. But
yeah,
either way, that's the thing. I think that's why next episode we're just gonna do 1940 to 1900
yeah. We think we're just
because
gonna cover a
yeah,
bigger chunk of time. Again, get really into Rise of Larsa and then Amenemhat the Second. Two
right.
big
Because he's
events that
pretty
kind of
big,
happen.
right?
We can really cover more of what's going on so that we have less of these podcasts where not too much is happening, which I still
But
appreciate.
even
Again,
though
it's
this
not that nothing's
we're
happening.
now at like an hour.
Oh my gosh. Okay, yeah, we should.
Yeah, we're fine. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to us while you do your dishes, everyone out there. Please follow us on Instagram at Lost Decades Pod, not podcast. before we wrap up with Egypt, um, I did want to add that Eminem the second, which yeah, actually here it does say 1920. So yeah, I don't know what I was saying before, but in 1920, Eminem will become. So this is a little spoiler for next time, but he'll become the ruler. But he's also going to be a co-regent, just like Senusret was with
Hmm. Smart succession
his
plan.
dad. So yeah, I don't know why. Also, it's showing here that it's saying he was his junior co-regent, Horus, and then Senusret the first was the senior co-regent, Osiris.
I
So I
think
thought
those are
you
their essentially official titles.
that's pretty sick. It's like I'm an Osiris.
Yeah.
That's what's so cool. If you lived back in this time, um, having all these god, I don't know. I just think Egyptian gods are sick. I mean, so are Babylonian, but there's something about them where when you see the hieroglyphics and the gods and everything, it's still 4,000 years later. It just looks really cool.
Yeah.
And Yu-Gi-Oh knew that. We don't talk about it enough, but they saw the
Yeah,
vision.
this was back when Yu-Gi-Oh was first invented, remember?
No, that's something. How have we not mentioned this?
Yeah, that this is what the
Eminem had
Egyptians.
the second invents Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yeah.
So that's going to be in the next episode.
We can talk about when they finally trapped the Blue Eyes White Dragon in the stone. It's gonna be crazy.
And then we're still hundreds of years away from Red Eyes Black Dragon. That's
Hmm.
way later.
I mean, I'm just excited for Pharaoh Kaiba, but we'll get there. We'll get there.
All right, leave a comment if you ever watched Yu-Gi-Oh! Abridged.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
All right,
Uh,
I think that's our time to wrap it up.
I
But
think
thanks
so.
for listening. Join us for episode 4, I think, right? No,
But
episode 5. Wow,
and not
we've
only
already done
that,
4 episodes. Look at us.
after next episode, we will have officially covered 100 years. So
That's exciting.
yeah,
And actually, it'll be a little more since we'll go all the way to 1900. So we're
yes.
cheating a little, but either way, we would have done 100 years. Wow. All right. Well, that's been the Lost Decades podcast. Get lost.